Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here at the BC Natural Resources Forum. My name is Rod Queering, a partner at MNP, proud to represent our firm, which is a strong supporter of the economic development in the natural resource sector here in British Columbia. MNP is honored to sponsor this forum and contribute to the growth and sustainability of this vital industry. Our team of advisors work closely with industry leaders and those adjacent sectors to drive innovation and success. We understand the unique challenges and opportunities in this region, and we are committed to helping our clients navigate them effectively. Thank you for joining us today, and I look forward to sharing insights and the panelist discussion of the future of economic development across Western Canada. Without further ado, I only have a minute, so that's all I had. I'm here to introduce Keivan Herji, the Principal Advisor, External Relations for North America of Newmont.
Thanks, Rob. Can you hear me? Yeah, perfect. You know, as I was walking up here, Sarah just said, break a leg. And I said, well, I've already done that. But nice to see everybody. My name's Keivan Herji. I work for Newmont Mining. We're a large mining company based out of Denver, but we've taken a strong position in BC with the acquisition of the Red Chris mine, the Bruce Jack mine, and half of Galore Creek with Teck Resources through a joint venture. So today our panel topic is on economic development in Western Canada. I'm going to start off with a little bit of context setting before passing it over to the phenomenal stellar speakers panel we have here, and we'll get into a little bit of discussion. But one of the things I wanted to share with the folks here today was somebody recently asked me, what do you do? And I said, I work in mining. And their response was, oh, we still do that. And I stopped them and I told them to look around the room. And I said, look at everything around us, because it was all either farmed, harvested, or mined for. It didn't come from anywhere else. And the reality is, this individual didn't think about the third scope, and they didn't think about supply chains. But natural resources, from oil and gas to forestry to mining, we are the foundation of society. We are the bedrock of the Canadian economy. You have to look no further than the TSX, where over 3/4 of the TSX, or close to 3/4, are natural resource companies. And as I look around this room today, I see a lot of people that I've had the privilege of working with in various different sectors, and we're all working towards a common goal, and we're all pulling in the same direction. Because the reality is, the world is hungry for the resources that we have. They need our gas to reduce their carbon emissions. They need our forestry products for low-carbon building materials, and they need our critical minerals for electrification and technological advancement. And so we have a great story to tell here if we can all pull in the same direction. Between Indigenous governments, and industry and communities about what we can actually offer the world. And I'm really pleased here today to hear from folks in industry who will talk a bit about the products that they're trying to deliver to the world who needs them, and how they're actually getting them there, and how communities and indigenous nations can actually benefit from that. So with that, I'd like to just start with Vern. Maybe each of you can just introduce yourselves and tell the crowd a little bit about your company.
Okay, thank you. My name is Vern Yu. I'm the CEO of AtlaGas. AtlaGas is an energy infrastructure company, and we have substantive investments in Western Canada where we process, fractionate, and transport natural gas and natural gas liquids on behalf of our customers. I think our biggest claim to fame with our Canadian midstream business is the fact that we're the largest conduit of propane and butane exports out of Canada to Asia, and that's a growing market for Canadian LPGs. We're in the process of expanding our export capability with a big project up in Prince Rupert on Ridley Island, the Ridley Island Energy Export Facility. Once that's up and running, we hope to have the ability to export about a couple 100,000 barrels a day of propane and butane to the world-class Asian market. So that's a very exciting opportunity for us, and look forward to talking more about that as we go forward here.
Excellent. Good morning, everyone. Shannon Young, I'm with PETRONAS Canada. We're very pleased to be invited to be part of this discussion. We think we're at a very critical time in British Columbia and Canada more broadly to be looking at investment and the growth opportunity. We've seen significant exodus or flight of capital out of British Columbia and Canada over the last number of years. And yet we have a growing demand, and particularly for natural gas and LNG in the Asian markets. And when we're seeing what's happening south of the border with the threat of tariffs, it's amplifying the need to diversify our markets. So a bit about PETRONAS. PETRONAS is a Fortune 500 country. Our head office is in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. We have operations in over 100 countries around the globe. And we operate upstream natural gas development in 23 countries. And so when we are looking to invest in Canada, we are competing for capital against those 22 other countries. And it has been very difficult in the last number of years for Canada to be successful in that. And I look forward to some of those discussions. PETRONAS has invested heavily in the world-class asset, which is the Montney Basin, which is some of the cleanest and low-carbon natural gas in the world. And we have partners from Sinopec from China, Brunei, and Indian Oil. And it's really important for Canada when we're looking at attracting foreign investment that we have this investment. We've got a foothold in the country, and how important it is for us to maintain that. We're also very proud to be leading in the assessment on how do we decarbonize, how do we make our gas even cleaner. And that's looking at CCS and electrification. And look forward to some of the discussions and on electrification from BC Hydro and what does that look like. And then we're also a partner in LNG Canada, and very excited to be celebrating the first cargo later this year. That's a very critical point for us to pause and I think celebrate as British Columbia and as Canada. And really now say, how can we build more of that, and how can we create the investment climate to encourage further investment and further major projects? Thanks.
Good morning. My name is Shaun Stevenson. I'm the President and CEO of the Prince Rupert Port Authority. I've been the CEO for now just over 6 years, but I've been with the organization for over 25. And I remember attending probably one of the earliest natural resource forums here and talking about projects at the Port of Prince Rupert and their relevance to the entire northern part of British Columbia. And I'm happy to see some of those projects have seen their way through. Today, the Port of Prince Rupert, has 7 main terminals, is about the 3rd largest port in Canada by value of trade, a strategic gateway and trade-enabling, suite of infrastructure to support Western Canadian trade in the Asia-Pacific region. Today, we support almost 4,000 direct jobs in northwestern BC. Half of those would be in Prince Rupert. But more importantly, or as important, we anchor about $60 billion worth of trade. And that's trade that benefits communities like Prince George, Fort St. John, Dawson Creek, Edmonton, and so forth. But we also have a very ambitious expansion plan. As Vernon touched upon, we've got a significant amount of expansion going on at the Port of Prince Rupert. There's nearly $3 billion in capital investment that's underway today, including new greenfield developments of terminals, enhanced logistics capacity, expansion, diversification of existing terminals. And as we look to the dynamic facing BC's economy, the natural resource economy that anchors the vitality of the province, and the threats that it's under right now with a changing U.S. administration, the role of the Port of Prince Rupert going forward is going to be critical to ensure that we're up for the challenge that represents, and we can, fully realize the benefits of our natural resource sector in northern BC.
Testing. My name's Keivan Carlick. My Tahltan name is Tudicho. Very proud to be speaking here on behalf of our nation, our nation's company. In fact, my wife, she's Nishka. She told me, the Tahltan are pretty prideful. In fact, You know how you've met into a Tahltan? Don't worry, they'll tell you. So I represent the Tahltan Nation Development Corporation as the Vice President of Partnerships. Of course, this company's been around for almost 40 years. It started out organically with our people becoming operators and starting up organically grown heavy equipment, heavy earth-moving division. From there, the years have gone by. We've made long-term strategic partnerships. In fact, today we have 37 partnerships of different sizes and models. We're a full-service organization to the mining industry, which we're very privileged to be what I would call within the Garibaldi volcanic belt. So that gives us long-term economic prosperity. We don't take for granted that, but we are every day trying to be excellent in business. And, very happy to be speaking on behalf of the people. I won't talk a lot about our mining because I want to leave some of that bragging for Keivan over there.
Thanks, Keivan, and thank you for those introductions. I think you heard some key themes that we're going to actually touch on throughout the conversation, from the tariff threat that we're facing from the States, and then also diversifying markets, and how to actually work with communities to share the economic wealth generated by resource projects. So my first question is for you, Vern. I mean, AtlaGas, an iconic midstream Canadian gas company, utility company. You talked a little bit about the journey that brought you here today, which has established AtlaGas as a blue chip company on the TSX. What's kind of the vision for the future, and how do you see the energy trilemma? This is a term I've heard you talk about in the past, and AtlaGas. Can you define what that is and how we actually solve it?
Okay, well, thanks for the question. I think what we do is provide energy to the people who want and need it. So as everyone here knows, that you need energy to live your day-to-day life. You need energy in the form of natural gas and LPGs to cook your food, to heat your house, and to have the electricity and all the other creature comforts that you're used to. Our job is to provide that energy to the end user, whether it's a global customer, whether it's a customer in Canada, or whether it's a utility customer of ours in the United States, in a manner that's affordable, reliable, and more less carbon intensive. So our job is to make sure that people have access to that energy, to make sure that that energy is reliable so that it's there when they need it. And you can see throughout the world that most people don't actually have the luxuries that we have with the energy that we have in Canada. So with respect to what we're doing in Canada, we are predominantly exporting propane and butane to Asian customers. We're providing them a source of energy that's cheaper and more reliable than other forms of energy. And it's more carbon friendly because it's displacing higher carbon fuel sources such as fuel oil, wood, and other things like that. So we have probably some of the most ESG friendly natural gas and LPG production in the world, and it's an opportunity to get this Canadian product to the best markets in Asia. Obviously, the recent announcements with the potential tariffs on Canadian product going to the US, which is the primary market today for propane and butane, is giving us impetus to further expand our business and diversify Canadian markets into Asia. So this is a huge opportunity for AtlaGas to work with our upstream customers and our downstream end-use customers to marry this great Canadian product with tremendous demand in Asia.
Yeah, I think that aligns quite well with some of the comments the Premier made last night about how we actually respond to this threat of tariffs. And it's really largely centered around strengthening our resource sector and diversifying it. So on that note, Shannon, I mean, you have a unique perspective working for PETRONAS, a company based out of Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. Celebrity status in the Formula One, if anybody follows Formula One. You've invested pretty heavily into BC with your own projects in the past that you've been a proponent of, and now taking a pretty significant equity stake in LNG Canada. How do you see the diversification of Canadian energy products worldwide and in Asia Pacific specifically?
When PETRONAS first invested in Canada, and that was in 2011, it was to pursue an integrated natural gas LNG project, and it was a multi-decade-long project, and it was really driven by the abundance of natural gas that we have in British Columbia, the skilled workforce, and at the time it was the perceived stability of the regulatory and policy environment, and that's obviously been a significant, there's been bumps in the road down that path. So all of the fundamentals remain in terms of the opportunity for Canada. We've often heard the statistics of transporting LNG from the West Coast is half the time as from the U.S. Gulf of Mexico. And LNG Canada will be producing the lowest emission intensity LNG in the world. And so those continue to be significant drivers for PETRONAS. When we look at world demand, and PETRONAS is interesting because we have a front row seat to what the energy transition looks like in the drive toward a lower emission future. And so in Malaysia, 45% of the power grid is still fueled by coal. And that's pretty consistent when you look at the Asian Pacific countries. And so that demand is there. For LNG, 65% of imports globally are going into that Asian market. And there's a 5% growth each year in demand. And so we see the stability of the market, we see the stability of the demand, and so it's very much this drive of, so how do we get these Canadian molecules into those markets? And so LNG Canada is a great first step, but the demand is there for more. And when we look at the risks of relying on a single market like the U.S. and how vulnerable we are to things like a trade war, I think it shows, as Vern said, it really drives forward how we have to be able to move forward, but we have to be able to move forward at pace. And that's been our most significant hurdle, is that the market demand globally is being filled, but not by Canada, and that has to change.
There is geopolitical uncertainty around the world, and there's geopolitical uncertainty in Asia. Is that affecting how you see potential customer markets?
Geopolitical instability that is definitely the new norm, but the market demand is there. And so, there has been a pendulum shift, I think, when we look back over the last 5 years to almost an exclusive focus on climate, a really important focus on that, but I think that became a bit out of whack in terms of our balance with affordability and security of supply. So there has been, I think, a bit of a shift more toward the middle, but we're continuing to see in the key Asian markets this drive forward to lower emissions.
Yeah, so it sounds like customer demand will prevail through geopolitical uncertainty because there's a need, there's a market need.
Exactly, and we're always keenly, and I'm sure everyone on this panel we're keenly looking, is there a greenium? Like, is there actually, is the market willing to pay more for our cleaner gas or our certified gas? And I know Jason from Equitable Origin is here, and a lot of our companies have done this third-party certification. And so, we're continuing this commitment. We're not seeing the greenium. And so that's why it's so important that Canada continues to be cost competitive, and that we're not layering additional costs, additional policies, emissions caps. Like, that has to stop if we want to play in the global market.
Makes sense to me. Switching gears a little, question for you, Keivan. TNDC is an economic development powerhouse among Indigenous nations. I know that firsthand, given that Newmont we do several $100 million of business each year, annually, with TNDC. What's kind of been the journey of TNDC to get to this point? What's the vision for the future, and what advice do you have for other Indigenous economic development corporations?
Thanks, Keivan. It's always great to talk about good news. I'm sure the development path of TNDC, I was born when TNDC was born, so I'm 40, TNDC's 40. I can't speak about the early years, but I definitely look back and look at the pioneers, lend recognition to the time of being Indigenous in the 80s, the systematic racism, There was a developing economy. People were trying to, give themselves value so they can earn a paycheck at those times. Poverty, the mix from poverty to non-impoverished people, was heavily Indigenous. So a lot of negative forces pushing down on our nations back then. So I'd like to point that out, but they still found it within themselves to overcome these issues by starting their own businesses, finding ways to capitalize it, finding strategic partnerships to participate in investment in our territory. So it started out back then by our people. I'm not going to name them all because I would butcher that and get myself in trouble. But I'll let you know there was a lot of Tahltans who made that move, and many of them, or descendants of them, are in the room. So they did a lot of strategic partnerships. The one key point I can tell you with our organization is many of our people back in the early 80s left our communities and gave themselves experience operating heavy equipment. That little addition to the startup of TNDC was what got us over the startup hurdle. And honestly, the earth moving division, which does about 80 million a year now, and it has about 250 pieces of heavy equipment. In fact, it employs up to 600 people. The construction division was organically grown without partnerships. Some people along the way did help co-sign equipment. I will not name them here, but they were non-Indigenous companies, and they do deserve a lot of gratitude. But for the most part, TNDC organically grew itself. It faced the world with different market forces. It made the changes it needed to. It made the strategic alliances it needed to in the early 80s. And then in the 90s, it kind of flourished from there. What they did was our nation invested a lot in our own people. I mean, I think I'm a good example of that. I'm thankful for my nation in that sense. But overall, we put business excellence first before politics. We made sure that we positioned ourselves so we don't have to say, hey, we're Tahltan, you gotta give us those contracts. We made sure when they approached us, they were comfortable in saying, TNDC can do this. TNDC, you're very well positioned in this market. We love doing work with you. We always feel great once you're done. We have a great relationship. So that's the one thing I'd say is what brought us here today. Another thing is strategic excellence. So we do measure our market, we look for gaps, and then we look for market leaders to fill them. So if we say we have 37 partnerships, there's a reason behind it, beyond just people meeting us at conferences. So my vision for the long term is we're looking to diversify and basically dominate the regular business market, even in businesses that may not have our name on it. You could be staying at a hotel and not know that we're the core shareholders of that business. So basically just keep expanding our footprint, and the key is reinvesting our money. But the most important part of this conversation is I love helping others. I love giving advice to others on our trials and tribulations because it will get them to their goal faster. And I made sure I wrote down some notes so I'm not just shooting from the hip. So my advice to other Indigenous corporations is, other side, sorry. Community ownership is key. So make sure your community owns it. You'll be a lot stronger if you own it as a community. Abide by your values. Never waver upon your values. It'll pay off in the long term. It makes you more stable. Have a long-term vision and do not have a fluffy strategy. Make sure it's a plan to win. This is a key one, and I see it every single day, including Newmont, AtlaGas built in our territory, but partnerships. Partnerships are so key to achieving goals, and especially if you're starting out, I highly recommend you start out with partnerships. Capacity building, you want your nation members to be involved, you got to invest in it now so it can pay off in 5 to 10 years. Don't be afraid to put money into your people. And of course, environmental stewardship, right? If something just does not fit your values around environmental stewardship, we as Tahltans often said, no, it doesn't matter what the economic rewards are. Our environment is so important to us because that's who we are as a people, that's what we value. And then the final one, of course, we all get excited when we see our first dividends or paychecks, but I highly urge you reinvest your money continuously. Find a percentage that you want to spend on your community, but keep reinvesting because that's how you're going to grow your long-term economic development. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelvin. And I like the point about partnerships and values. Yeah, round of applause for Kelvin.
I was just going to ask if I could have that list, please.
There you go.
Thank you.
I like it. No, and at the end of the day, when we talk about partnerships, it's sometimes easy to get wrapped up in a big company like AtlaGas or Newmont or PETRONAS talking to a nation like Tahltan Nation. At the end of the day, it's just people. It's people sitting down and just talking to each other on a human-to-human basis, and we really need to make sure that that is what underpins all the work that we're doing. Shaun, question for you. President-elect Donald Trump indicated that he would be implementing a 25% tariff on Canadian goods. This would be devastating for the Canadian market. I also think it would be devastating for American consumers in a supply-constrained market. But 75% of our exports, approximately, go to the U.S. Now, the Port of Prince Rupert is a gateway to other international markets. What's currently moving through the port right now? Where do you see additional opportunities? And you also mentioned a term to me, I think you called it the economic renaissance that Western Canada is going through. What does that actually mean to you?
Well, there's no doubt when you look at market diversification beyond the U.S., Prince Rupert will play an integral role, not just for northern British Columbia or BC overall, but all of Canada. Today, we anchor trade between Canada and Korea, China, Japan, and even farther afield. And we're seeing the shifts in manufacturing on the import side already begin to evolve as you look at new areas like Vietnam, the Indian subcontinent as sources of manufacturing away from China in anticipation of some of those potential tariffs with China, for example. So, but as the closest North American port to Asia, we represent a tremendous opportunity for us to pivot to new markets. Today, between exports of metallurgical coal, essential for steel making, agri in both bulk and containers, forest products in containers, and growing energy exports with the Ridley Island Propane Export Terminal and now the Reef Project, and also Pembina's facility, we see Prince Rupert's role even being larger. But it also symbolizes an economic transition and a bit of a renaissance for northwestern BC. We're all, mindful of the impacts of mill closures and the adjustments happen in the forest sector and how that's impacted the entire north of the province. But we're seeing new opportunities in mining and especially in your region, we're seeing new opportunities in exports of energy. And all of that represents not just employment in terminaling and the supply chains that are necessary to enable market access, but the real torque in those industries creating and contributing to the economic vitality of the communities in which those industries reside in northeastern BC and otherwise. And I think there's tremendous opportunity to see that benefit not just the regions in which those industries operate, but the broader north of the province of BC. In addition, what we're seeing, I think, in the economic expansion and diversification playing out in northern BC, we're seeing a much more inclusive economic expansion, and you touched upon it, the partnerships that have been reached in Tahltan Territory. We're seeing the same thing in Prince Rupert. The Indigenous community participation in the growth and expansion of the port is incredible, and we continue to look to expand and how we can do that. We've seen over $500 million worth of contracting, construction, and other opportunities being realized within the Indigenous communities. 36 to 38% of our workforce is members of our Indigenous community. So it's a much more inclusive economic expansion. But that also has to be mindful in the communities in which we operate. So, and I'm really happy with the success the city of Prince Rupert's seen in seeing their infrastructure renewal and the support from governments of both BC and federally. So, but yeah, so I think the role of the Port of Prince Rupert is going to be integral in us being able to be resilient in the face of challenges in that north-south trade. But it really represents a significant opportunity for the entire north of the province with all of these industries expanding.
Yeah, that's great. And, as we think about the U.S. a little bit more, there's a delegation of premiers from across the country heading to Washington, D.C. on February 12th. Now, Vernon AtlaGas has utilities, regulated natural gas utilities you sell into the States, is my understanding. So you're pretty live to this issue. And, if a tariff war were to erupt between Canada and the U.S., what would be the implications of that, and how are you taking measures to respond to that potentially, or thinking about that?
Well, obviously everyone knows that a tariff war is not good for consumers and both Canada and the U.S., but there is a strong political movement, obviously in the U.S., of balancing trade surpluses. We're the natural gas utility for Washington, D.C., and our biggest AltaGas customer is the U.S. federal government. So we supply them with natural gas. So the good news for the U.S. customer is that the United States is long natural gas. So by putting a tariff on Canadian natural gas, it's not actually going to impact the local consumer. Where it is a bigger problem for the U.S. consumer is on heavy oil. And because the U.S. is actually short heavy oil, and they have a lot of refineries configured to run heavy oil. For the rest of our energy products, the U.S. is the biggest producer of energy in the world right now. So that is an existential threat for us Canadians, as we're a big energy exporter. It just shows the importance of having more LNG facilities in Western Canada. Shows the importance of more egress for Canadian oil to other markets. And then finally, for us in propane and butane, it really wants us to investigate whether we can do the second and third phases of REEF even quicker than we thought we were going to have to when we FID'd the project last May. So I think as Canadians, we just have to think, while we're highly dependent on the U.S., this is probably going to blow over, but in the long run, we got to make sure that we have more diversification, because you can't, if you're highly dependent on one customer, even if it's a good customer, you need to make sure that you have other options.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, we're kind of in a tricky situation right now because of the uncertainty in Ottawa, and we don't have a strong advocate in the States right now. Any comments on just or advice to Ottawa right now and the premiers as they're heading down there on how to actually represent Canada and British Columbia?
I can offer from a PETRONAS perspective. So, as an investor, you are seeking certainty and stability. And with the incoming U.S. administration, we're not expecting that. So it does become critical of how does Canada respond to that. And it's been encouraging to hear the words from Premier Eby last night in terms of the plan and the focus on diversification, and then the focus on what can we do within our domestic regulatory framework or within British Columbia to help, to drive that diversification. And that's really the focus on permitting. And permitting, I think, across many industries. It was very interesting to hear the forestry panel earlier this morning. But that is a problem, and that is putting us in a very vulnerable position through the U.S. tariff issue. And so that's where the coordination between provinces and with the federal government is critical. And so I think we're seeing strong leadership from the premiers. And the faster we can get to a federal election, the better. To have that stability, but absolutely, everything that's driving for stability. And just so one last point from the PETRONAS perspective is these are multi-decade projects, and so this may be a period of economic uncertainty and impact, which will be very, very difficult for Canada and for British Columbia. But these major projects, we're looking like what's past that. So we want to ensure that the government is also taking that long-term view and avoiding knee-jerk reactions.
Great, thanks, Shannon. Shaun, you had a quick point?
Yeah, I think there's a short game and a long game. The short game is make sure you protect Canadian interests and remind the U.S. of the mutually beneficial open trade relationship that we've enjoyed for decades. Secondly, is invest strategically in infrastructure and ensure that projects have certainty on regulatory approval timelines so that we can secure the capital required to have options of how we anchor, Canada's trade that contributes to the prosperity of every individual resident of Canada. And that's been sorely lacking. The opaque and uncertain regulatory processes have put at risk capital that wants to come to Canada. And I think that long game, you've seen the effect of the opening of TMX is we have choice now of where we export to. Similarly with the Ridley Island Propane Export Terminal and now REEF expanding that capacity, it means barrels of propane and butane and other liquid bulk in the future will have choice in the markets they serve. That will ultimately give us better deals in our trade into the U.S. and expose us to a global market opportunity.
That's great, Shaun. And negotiation, the first rule is, know what your BATNA is, your best alternative to the negotiated agreement. And I think Canada has lost sight of that a little, and we need to reestablish what our BATNA is. In the last minute and a half here, I want to talk about infrastructure. Keivan, Tahltan Nation, mining companies in Northwest BC, the government, we had a lot of success in thinking about the infrastructure that was needed and coming together to establish what shared priorities were. And a good example of that was the $195 million for highway upgrades into Northwest BC that came out of recognizing there were challenges for communities and challenges for industry. So what infrastructure do we need to help develop the North? And what's the role that nations have to play in the development of that infrastructure?
Well, I guess straight out of the bag, Thailand right power. Many nations since the 2014 Supreme Court case have given a lot of power over projects. We won't specifically say veto, but it's effectively that. So sometimes we use that as leverage, and we try to look at our economy, especially as Tahltans. How can we stabilize our economy by helping out the equation, rather than just say, hey, you got to get our free and prior informed consent? We kind of look at it proactively, saying, while you may need better roads, our people need safer roads. Let's talk to private industry, let's talk to public government, and see how we can all put our heads together and make this work. First Nations on the political front have a lot of leverage when it comes to talking about funding. More than anything with TNDC as well, we look at how can mines be successful. I often tell people, I'm like, don't only look at trying to be excellent in business. Look at your clients, the people who pay the bills. How can you help them be successful? And how can you make sure their supply chain stabilizes so they can be efficient with their projects that ultimately benefit you? So overall, yeah, First Nations have a lot of political power when it comes to negotiating many different topics within the industries.
Yeah, and we are so dependent on the infrastructure that you actually help build. And when you think about resource projects, there's a whole bunch of peripheral infrastructure around it that actually makes those projects operational. I think that's all the time that we have for today. So thank you very much to the panel. If I could get a round of applause.